when a CIA officer betrayed both America and the Soviets and survived. During the Cold War, loyalty was a dangerous currency. A single misstep could mean death. Agents didn't live between borders, but between lies. They changed names, faces, passports, and, sometimes, even convictions. In a world divided by fear, truth and deception were interchangeable weapons, and betrayal was, at times, the only way to survive. Under the gray lights of Moscow and Washington, men and women played a silent game where every move cost a life. Some betrayed for ideology, others for money, and a few simply out of boredom. But among them, there was one who went further than anyone else. A man who learned to move through the shadows, without belonging to either of the sides that hunted him. A ghost who navigated between two worlds, selling secrets to both the CIA and the KGB, and outsmarting, for nearly a decade, the most feared intelligence agencies on Earth. His name was Aldrich Ames, a spy who didn't need a gun or poison to change the course of history. His weapon was betrayal. His battlefield, trust itself. Because in the game of espionage, no one is completely guilty, no one is completely innocent, and the first casualty is always the truth. Aldrich Ames joined the CIA in 1962, following in the footsteps of his father, himself an officer of the agency. From a young age, he had grown up wandering through hallways filled with secrets, surrounded by men who spoke in whispers and lived under false names. For Ames, the agency wasn't just a job, it was an inheritance. He was intelligent, disciplined, and ambitious. But beneath that polished facade hid a deeply unstable man. His introspective nature isolated him from his colleagues. His marriage was falling apart, his finances were in ruins, and his career was beginning to stall. At Langley, his superiors saw him as just another bureaucrat, efficient but unremarkable. No one imagined that behind that ordinary face lay the potential for one of the greatest betrayals in modern history. During the 1970s and 1980s, Ames worked directly in the Soviet Counterintelligence Division, one of the most sensitive departments in the entire agency. He had access to lists of informants, the identities of double agents, and classified reports on covert operations in Moscow, Berlin, and Prague. Every day, he handled information that could cost lives. He knew who was infiltrating the KGB, who was feeding documents to the CIA, and who was pretending loyalty to both sides. For years, Ames was the guardian of those secrets, until the weight of his own life began to crush him. Alcohol became his refuge. His debts mounted, and a new love, a Colombian woman named Rosario, drew him into a lifestyle far beyond his means. He needed money, and in the Cold War, money always had a price. The price of betrayal. In 1985, while the world remained divided between East and West, Aldrich Ames crossed an invisible line. He reached out to the enemy, the KGB itself, and offered to sell what the CIA valued most: the names of its own agents in Moscow. It was the beginning of the greatest intelligence collapse in American history. And it all started with a man who no longer believed in anything. Not in his country, not in his cause, not even in himself. In 1985, Aldrich Ames crossed the line. He did it without drama, without looking back. On a gray morning, he walked toward the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., carrying a neatly folded envelope inside his coat. He entered, asked to speak with an intelligence officer, and placed the envelope on the desk. No speech, no excuses, just a silent offer worth more than gold. Inside was a list of every Soviet agent working for the CIA. Names, addresses, contacts, communication routes. Each one represented a life hanging by a thread. In return, Ames asked for $50,000 in cash, a trivial price for the magnitude of what he had just done. That act marked the beginning of one of the greatest betrayals in the history of modern espionage. Within weeks, the KGB used the information to completely dismantle the American network in Moscow. Operations that had taken years to build collapsed overnight. Dozens of agents were arrested, interrogated, or executed. Others simply vanished without a trace. In Langley, chaos spread through the corridors. No one understood what was happening. Reports poured in with news of simultaneous collapses, as if someone had opened an invisible door inside the system. The CIA launched an internal hunt, searching for the traitor within its ranks. For years, they never suspected that the culprit was right in front of them, drinking coffee in the same cafeteria, laughing with the same colleagues he had already condemned to death. Meanwhile, Ames enjoyed his new life. Luxury cars, Italian suits, a refined home in Arlington, and a wife who didn't ask too many questions. Everything paid for with Soviet money. Each handover of information became bolder. Ames no longer sold just names. He sold strategies, communication systems, and CIA operational plans in Eastern Europe. The KGB considered him an invaluable asset. Washington, meanwhile, still saw him as just another bureaucrat. For nearly a decade, Ames walked the razor's edge, playing a double game only he seemed capable of mastering. And when he was finally interrogated years later, his words were recorded in the agency's archives, a cold echo of his self-justification. I didn't betray my country. I only betrayed a system that was already rotten. A man who no longer believed in anything, except his own ability to deceive everyone. What the KGB never knew was that Aldrich Ames was using them too. While the Soviets saw him as their most valuable source inside the CIA, he was playing a far more dangerous game, one of calculated deception. Ames leaked genuine intelligence, mixed with perfectly crafted lies. He changed dates, altered names, and manipulated data with such subtle precision that even his own handlers couldn't detect it. He was a magician of espionage, a man who could make the truth vanish amid a maze of half-truths. At times, he handed over secrets that had already lost their operational value. Other times, he kept documents for himself, papers that could have cost him his life if they fell into the wrong hands. Ames wasn't just a spy. He was a merchant of information, a man who had turned betrayal into an exact science. To the CIA, he remained a dull, harmless bureaucrat, efficient but unremarkable. To the KGB, he was an indispensable ally, the crown jewel of Soviet intelligence. But in truth, he belonged to neither. Ames worked for the only side that would never betray him, his own. With Soviet money, he bought silence, luxury, and time. Time to erase traces, manipulate reports, and rewrite his own story. His survival depended on perfect balance. To give just enough to remain useful, but never so much as to become disposable. For a few years, he achieved the impossible. To be a double agent who betrayed both sides, and still keep the trust of each. He became a ghost within the system, a shadow that left no footprints, a man who had learned to survive in the only place where no one survives for long, between the CIA and the KGB. But fate owes loyalty to no one, and in the world of espionage, even shadows eventually cast a shape. The CIA began to notice patterns. The KGB started asking questions. The two empires he had manipulated were slowly turning their gaze toward him. And like every mask that wears thin with time, Ames's began to crack. In 1994, after nearly a decade of suspicion and a silent manhunt within the CIA itself, Aldrich Ames's empire of deception finally began to crumble. For years, the agency had searched for an explanation, a reason behind the endless string of failures, vanished agents, and compromised operations. Every lead hit a wall. Every suspect was cleared, until analysts began to look closer into the very heart of Langley. Ames, the quiet man, the model employee, was living a lifestyle that defied every line of his government paycheck. Luxury cars, Italian suits, an elegant home in Arlington, and a bank account that grew as if fueled by a foreign treasury. The CIA and the FBI joined forces in an investigation that lasted for months. They tapped phones, tracked his movements, and uncovered a pattern as unmistakable as it was chilling. Each time, Ames accessed classified information. An American asset in Moscow disappeared. On February 21st, 1994, the hunt came to an end. As he left his house for work, Ames was surrounded by federal agents. He didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He simply looked up at the gray Virginia sky and said calmly, "I guess it was time." During the interrogation, there were no tears, no drama. He confessed with the detachment of a man who knew his story was already written. "I only did what anyone would do to survive," he repeated again and again, as if his betrayal were an act of self-preservation, not ambition. Ames was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His wife, Rosario, was also arrested as an accomplice. The marriage that once shared secrets and silence ended in eternal quiet. But the most unsettling part wasn't his arrest. It was what it revealed, that for nearly a decade, the most dangerous spy of the Cold War had operated right under his superiors' noses. He had deceived the CIA. He had manipulated the KGB. And he had done it without ever raising suspicion, playing both empires as if they were pawns on his personal chessboard. In his cell, Ames never asked for forgiveness. He never expressed regret, perhaps because, in his mind, he had never truly lost. He had survived longer than any other traitor. And in the twisted logic of espionage, that too was a victory. The story of Aldrich Ames is a whispered warning from the coldest corridors of the Cold War. A lesson in how power, ambition, and fear can coexist within a single man. In a world where truth was paid for in blood, Ames chose lies as his refuge, not out of ideology nor inverted patriotism, but for something far more human and far darker, the need to feel untouchable. While other spies were executed, exiled, or erased from history, he remained alive. Trapped behind four walls, yes, but alive, with the certainty that he had outsmarted every system he had sworn both to serve and to betray. His name now stands beside those of Kim Philby, the British mole who sold out half an empire, and Oleg Gordievsky, the double agent who escaped the Soviet bloc hidden in the trunk of a car. But Ames did not escape. He did not run. He did not hide. He simply waited to be caught, as if the ending were part of his own experiment. Today, his aged face and cold words from prison interviews still remind the world that in the game of espionage, there are no winners, only survivors. Because in the end, Aldrich Ames didn't betray a country. He betrayed them all, and himself. And in his silence, one final irony remains. The man who once held the world's deepest secrets was ultimately consumed by the only one he could never control, his own. During the Cold War, no one was ever completely innocent. Not the CIA, not the KGB, and not those who survived by navigating between them. Because in the world of espionage, truth is not a light. It's a weapon, shaped and sharpened by whichever side wields it. Loyalties shift, ideals dissolve, and the line between duty and betrayal becomes impossible to see. Aldrich Ames was neither a monster nor a hero. He was the purest reflection of the Cold War itself, an era where lies were the only truth everyone shared. While some died defending flags, others learned that real power didn't lie in truth, but in who could sell it for the highest price. Because in the end, the most dangerous spy isn't the one who changes sides, but the one who stops believing in any. The one who looks at the board, smiles, and decides to play only for himself. In a world divided by fear, Ames didn't choose a side. He chose to survive. And in that choice, he became the perfect traitor and the last witness to a game where no one ever truly won.